Yep, 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 yep. I got to turn that one on. Well, well, well. Here we are again. Good to see you all in the virtual space, both on YouTube and on Facebook. Yeah, yeah. All right, we are in chapter 9. Yeah, chapter 9. We're dealing and examining through the lens of Dr. Wright, the Ethiopian eunuch, and we'll be working with this brother for the next several weeks. So we want to take a moment, if you don't mind. We'll start out with the word of prayer. Those of you who are in virtual space, you can begin to just assume a moment of meditation. Dear God, thank you for this time. Dear God, thank you for this time, and thank you for these who are gathering both virtually and physically. We thank you, dear God, for your presence that continually gives us strength and endurance along this journey. And we thank you, dear God, for the work that you have wrought through Dr. Wright. So now we pray your spirit, as always, bless us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Yeah, we are looking at, hey there, Kim. We are examining chapter 9. And again, for the next several weeks, we're going to look at this brother, the Ethiopian eunuch. This is the story of the Ethiopian eunuch is one of my absolute favorites because, as Dr. Wright put it, there is so much dynamite in this of Acts chapter 8, verses 27 and 28. There's so much dynamite in those two verses that they literally blow up all of the false notions of the history of the scriptures and the Bible and the faith. It just blows up all of the misinterpretations and misconceptions about black folk and their place within the forming of this faith. It just blows up so much ignorance about, black folk in particular that has been, promulgated and promoted in this particular society to try to demean black people, to make the world, or in particular, folk in this country, think that black folk are ignorant. Black folk, didn't come from civilization. The black people didn't learn to read and write until white folk, beneficently put them in chattel slavery. That, black folk have not contributed anything to civilization and things like that. These two verses have so much dynamite that they blow all of that stuff out of the water. And so we're going to look at it. To get into it, I want to examine something, though. Because the other thing that this lifts up, I did an article. Hopefully it'll come out in the Crusader this week. And incidentally, I said Sunday, and I want to say it again, that I don't determine what pictures the Crusader uses along with my article. And so I don't have a problem with the picture they use. I just want folk to understand that the article was not directed at Senator Raphael Warnock, because he is a pastor and he is a senator. And that's why I didn't name any in the article. I just said there are a number of pastors who have run for elective office, and they've done a marvelous job. And so I don't take nothing away from that, but the article is examining, the challenges of pastoring a church and holding political office. There are some compromises that you got to make. And I examined them in the article from the background of Scripture, and to in the way of looking at, are there any precedents in Scripture for a pastor running for office? And there are none. There are none. But that doesn't mean a pastor shouldn't run for office. I'm just saying that there are, there are some compromises that have to be made. And I cite Dr. King, who they were trying to tout him to run for president. And they run for the election of president in '68, and there was a group of people, wealthy group of people, who had approached him in 1967 for him to run for president. They thought he would be a great candidate. And he says he contemplated it for a moment and then realized his work was better outside of partisan politics to make sure that those in politics would be held accountable. And that was his position, that, my work organizing and mobilizing holds elected officials accountable. And I can do that freely, from outside of the political spectrum, because once you become, part of the political spectrum, there are some responsibilities that you have to whatever political party, whatever the particular legislation is that may hold some stuff that may be detrimental to your community, but there may be something else. It's called an omnibus bill. And there may be some other stuff in the bill that's extremely good. And you got to make a decision. Do I vote for this bill to go through, this legislation to go through, because it has some wonderful stuff, but there's one or two things that are going to be detrimental to my community. And you're going to be held accountable whichever way you vote. If you vote no on it, then folks going to say you don't want that good stuff. And he voted against it. And the next person that's running against you going to run against you on that. Now, he had this opportunity to bring this to the community. If you vote for it, there are going to be other folks that say, yeah, you see there? He voted for this nasty stuff to come into our community. Or she voted for this stuff, and it's just hurting our community. So in that way, you are a part of the animal of politics. And it's hard to then be outside of it, because you do have to be productive. If you are holding elective office, you have to bring the bacon to the table of the community, right? You got to do that. That's what your job is, bring resources. And however you bring those resources, well, that's the political part, right? So the whole article is is just taking a look at that, and not to suggest that any pastor shouldn't run for office, but it does hold some challenges. So, in that, there are some things that we have to be cognizant of from the political spectrum. So there are people that will say, religion and politics don't mix. So all they want to hear is heaven, 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 shout, 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 joy, 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 right? That's all they want to hear. And I'm suggesting that is a part of the brainwashing, the part of the misinterpretation of Scripture. It is a part of what we might have even got. I've got family members, close family members, that have told me over the years, Pastor Jackson, well, they don't call me pastor, they're family members, right? They just say, Johnny, you preach the gospel, son, preach the gospel. That's all. Don't want to hear no politics. I said, well, I got to preach what Jesus preached, right? And Jesus talked more about the political situation of his people than he talked about heaven, okay? Because people are affected by what goes on, and Jesus, in a great sense, was organizing people to not only resist that political system that was set in motion by Roman colonization, and then perpetuated by African Jews who were being paid by Rome, right? So he not only organized the people to resist that, but create an alternative community of where God is the guide and the rule and how we treat one another, right? That alternative community was to grow. and because it would be pleasing, because it was a community, it would be a community where everybody is valued, more people would begin to gravitate to that. So Jesus was starting a movement, right? And movements are political, okay? So to African people, there is not a separation of what is called a bifurcation or a separation from the political, from the spiritual, the social. All of those are one because you experience all of those. People used to talk about Bill Clinton, when he was president, that he could compartmentalize things, right? He could have one section in his mind that he's focused on, and the other sections, he would not let them intrude on his decision about, military this or that. Well, that's a European way of seeing life, that you can look at only one section of it and not consider the other sections that are affected also. So compartmentalizing was touted as something that was great. I'm saying that wasn't great. I called that tunnel vision. I'm focused on only what I think. And regardless of what is going on with other people, not only in this country, but in this world. Charles is there. So African people don't separate those things. They are all together. And so that's why the decisions that are made, African people, a political decision affects the spiritual. The spiritual mindset affects the political and the social. It affects all areas of our life. And so, that in itself is extremely important to remember. Again, as we have grown up in churches, and again, I grew up in 2 churches, and so I don't fault those that were my teachers and the older individuals in the church. They only gave what they knew. Remember, in this nation, we were intentionally, systematically prohibited and limited in the different areas that we could examine and study in. There were many places where, many times we're talking about this is a matter of life and death. For you to even have to show any inclination that you could read, it could mean some brutal things could happen to you. So I don't fault those that that had those mindsets. A lot of that was because of limitation, and the other part of it was fear. So one of the things, many folk have been looking at in reflection, I've had to do it, it's how we raise our children and use what we call corporal punishment. What we call in the black community, you get your butt beat, right? And we were just talking with a group of brothers, I'm talking with some brothers not long ago, and we were talking about, how we used to get, our not spankings, but beatings. One guy said, his parents used the belt on him. And another guy said, well, the old one where you got to go out and get the switch. And if you come back with something little, my grandmama would say, boy, go back out there and get the right switch now. And sometimes they would braid 2 or 3 of them. You make you braid 2 or 3 together, right? And so, and then I'd say, hey, I got the ironing cord. And I end up, in a big way raising my children the same way. And in reflection, as an adult, after they, got grown, had time to really think, I realized where that came from. That came from the experience that our folk had in chattel slavery, in particular with boys, so that they don't get picked out for certain things that slave owners wanted. Parents would beat them because young boys come up a little aggressive, right? It's just natural. And parents there was a saying, I'm going to beat you for the police beat you. Because if the police beat you, they're going to kill you. In other words, it was a way of beating the boy in particular, it was girls too, into some type of submission that these authorities in this world will kill you, and my talking is not going to get it across to you. And so then part of my frustration is in my hand and in that belt. You see? And so some of that is the scientists call it epigenetic. It comes through our DNA. Those traumas and then that fear that I want this child to be in a way subservient. So men and women who have worked in corporate America, especially men that have, that are over 6 feet, black men, over 6 feet, may be a little buff, If they work in corporate America, you notice there are a lot of men that kind of droop their shoulders because it was seen as intimidating to the white coworkers, especially white men, And there was, it's just like the women couldn't wear braids and stuff like that. These things are intimidating. And so all of these social, not written mores and norms that you had to navigate as a black person then created the context we're talking about where, we wanted our children to understand that these powers, these authorities are vicious. And so in looking in examining that, that's why I try to point out that the scriptures are reflecting that. In other words, when you read the Bible, we ought to be reading from the position of oppressed people dealing with oppression. Because the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is telling the story of oppressed people who are navigating one of 5 kinds of oppression, either Egyptian oppression, Babylonian oppression, Persian oppression, Greek oppression, or Roman oppression. From Genesis to Revelation, and Egyptian oppression, Babylonian oppression, and Persian oppression are African people oppressing other African people. Greek and Rome are the Europeans that come on the scene, okay? That's what the scriptures are. So when we read it, which is one of the reasons why, many folk interpret it from a total spiritual vantage point is because, white folk in Europe wanted to change the way you see it. So they set out to begin to offer models of interpretation that would focus more on going to heaven than what was going on earth, because they were a part of the very mechanism that was making things horrible for people. So they would, if they were talking about teaching it the way it is written and why it was written, then it would indict them, right? So empires and people in power would never do that. So in light of that, and looking at our scriptures, Governor Ron DeSantis, as many of you probably heard by now, banned AP, those advanced placement courses in college, the AP courses that deal with black history. Now, the AP courses are optional anyway. And guess what? Many black students are not going to take the AP course in Africana studies because they're going to take it in college, right? He's talking about, AP courses, in high school. But he banned them, right? And he had already, not too long before that, banned the teaching of critical race theory because he put out this thing, a Stop Woke Act, okay? Taking terminology that black folk created and making it, a beast, What did the guy say when he shot Michael Brown? He was like this big beast. Now, this boy, 16, 15, 16 years old, it was like a big beast coming at me. This is the type of narrative that is used to describe, our people. And so taking the terminology black folk created, stay woke, in other words, stay aware. Daddy O'Daly, Kim don't know nothing about this, but Daddy O'Daly in Chicago, she too young. She don't know nothing about this, But y'all know, and I'm looking at some folk on here don't know nothing about it. Daddy O'Daly in Chicago, he would say in his jazz program, he'd say, "Old aware one, old aware one." It was years before I realized what he was saying. Old aware one. In other words, you have lived, you are conscious, you are woke, you are aware of what's going on. That was a signal Daddy O'Daly would send out. And when he was talking about during the jazz program, some of the stuff that black folk had to deal with, old aware one, okay? In other words, DeSantis is taking that which black folk have used as code to say, hey, let's stay alert, let's be, here's a one that Kim will know. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? I ain't picking on you tonight, Kim. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Well, Ron DeSantis took that and created a Stop Woke Act and banned critical race theory in grammar schools and high schools. First of all, critical race theory, he don't even know what it is. Well, he probably does, but he's playing to that rabid crowd. Because he's not a dummy, but he has to play like, he is an Okie from Muskogee or whatever, like he is the guy wrote that book, Hillbilly Elegy, that knucklehead. He has to play like that because, he's playing to this group. And so critical race theory is not taught in grammar schools or high school. It is discussed in law school because it is looking at the legal system in this country and examining and documenting how it is racist to the core. But the telling part is in Florida, they have AP courses in European history. They didn't touch that. AP courses in art history. Now, guess what art they're looking at? They're not looking at African art. They're not looking at Hispanic, art. They're not looking at Chinese art. Looking at European art, right? What they have an AP course, Japanese language and culture. They ain't touched that. AP course, German language and culture. Italian language and culture. DeSantis is a child of Italian immigrants. Just, They have a course in Spanish language and culture. Now, here's the thing. German, Italian, and European are the same. So you are reinforcing what? European, okay? Now, there are different groups of Europeans yes, there are. But we're still looking at European history. So European history, then German, then Italian, and even Spanish. Because in Spain, somebody from Cuba and somebody from, Central South America that speaks Spanish, they go to Spain, and Spain looks at them like, British folk look at American folk that go over there to speak English. Like, y'all just messed up the language. So what is the objective? The objective again is that what is real and true is trying to be covered. The history that our people have experienced in this nation. There are a bunch of people now because, again, you got social media, you've got all kind of ways that messages are getting out. And they're worried because they recognize that if their children start actually studying what really happened, not all, but many will begin to say, this is just foul, right? And then, of course, black children. The objective has from the get-go to keep us ignorant of who we are and what we have done. And so I want to read a piece. I read some last week from Daniel Black. I want to read one other piece briefly as introduction. And let's see if I can find it. Okay. This is from his book, The Coming. He says, we couldn't separate our condition from our convictions. They're in the belly of the ship now. He says, we couldn't separate our conditions from our convictions. Most had not achieved that mastery. So we critiqued ourselves. We needed someone to blame, someone upon whom to lay the responsibility of our coming. Maybe we were the problem. We considered perhaps our feet weren't fast enough, unlike crewmen's feet. Perhaps ours were too flat, too thick, too big to have carried us swiftly. Or maybe our lips had failed to deliver the message of impending bondage because, unlike theirs, ours were bold and bulging. We even considered that their abuse of our women might have been because our buttocks protruded. This would be true for some of our men too. None of this had been a liability before. Our bodies had been our glory. We painted and adorned ourselves because we thought we were beautiful. Our decorated lips, hair, eyes, buttocks, feet, wide noses had all been expressions of self-adoration. Our body parts were the trademark we believed of a sacred, majestic people. Now, the ugliness of our situation made us begin to loathe the body we once loved. It was a gradual occurrence at first, more a thought than a truth, but we knew that once planted, a seed soon reveals all that it bears. The evening and the morning were the 57th day. And so what Dr. Black in this narrative is pointing out, the seeds of self-hate. That how did we get into this? How did we let ourselves get into this situation? How did things go so wrong? When I would talk on WLTH, there was a guy that always called in and said, black people sinned. His name was Doc, and we didn't know his real name. But he said, black people sinned. That's why white folk were ordained by God to teach us a better way. He would come on and say this, right? And there are many folk you have run across who if they don't outright say it, they'll say it's our fault. You know, we want to blame one another. That's why the movie Woman King was created a lot of chatter, because it showed that Dahomey had participated in capturing some Africans so that Europeans could take them over. And then folk wanted to say, well, see, Dahomey, these are black folk. These black folk doing it to black folk. And so I didn't read the part of what Daniel Black pointed out, and I'm going to try to read it at the end. But we want to blame us, because how else? But it's part of the brainwashing. It's part of the conditioning to make you doubt you, to make you believe that you are worthy of this, that or you deserve this, right? And so we have to it's running through the unguided anger runs through now. So we got senseless killings, right? Because black life is cheaper, right? right? So there is generally no punishment. In one of Spike Lee's movie, I don't know if it was Clockers, but the detectives would come by the crime scene and put DMF in chalk. DMF, dead MF. And as Gil Scott Heron say, they would say drug related, which means no investigation, right? It's just a label. This is another dead black person, because to many, not most Europeans, we were not human, and we're still not humans, right? I forget the reporter, the black woman. She's a black woman, and she was in somehow she was able to hear some of the comments that detectives were making in Los Angeles Police Department, and they would say to one another when it was a black person, and black person that had been murdered or whatever, and white detectives would look at one another and say, "No humans involved." They had the report, put it on there, "No humans involved." L.A. And I'm gonna get the name of the reporter. No humans involved. Because for many, which is why in the medical profession, that's why you have to be your advocate, have somebody as your advocate, because one of the thoughts running in the medical profession among white folks and other folks that are immigrated over to this country is that black people they have a high tolerance for pain. So a black woman comes in and says, this pain is killing me. Oh, you'll be all right. Just just take a couple pills. You'll be all right. But a white woman comes in, oh, I'm doubling over with same situation. I'm doubling over with pain. What can we do? We got to manage this pain. What can we got to do some stuff, right? Because no humans involved. That context is what we look at as we look at Scripture. The association, Dr. Jeremiah Wright used to quote the Association of Black Psychologists. He would quote them often because over 40 years ago, the Association of Black Psychologists said, any black person in America who is not paranoid is not normal. You hear me? The Association of Black Psychologists, any black person in America that's not paranoid is not normal. James Baldwin, before that, remember what he said? James Baldwin said, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. To be black in this country and to have some wits about you, to be relatively conscious, is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time. This is the context in which we examine the Ethiopian eunuch coming to Jerusalem to worship. Dr. Wright used as a lens the question of why black men are not in church. Now, this sermon that he did in this book was done in 1994. Okay, so, this has been a recurring theme. Why black men not in church? And so there's a whole bunch we can talk about there. But he points out that one of the problems that black men are not in church is because we don't get the Jesus question straight. He says you get the Jesus question straight. People who join the church for the wrong reason, because people join the church for the wrong reason because they haven't got the Jesus question straight. People leave churches for the wrong reason because they don't have the Jesus question straight. People get confused by doctrines of denominations and get conflicted on what people in denominations say rather than getting this Jesus question straight. He says, if the Jesus question isn't straight, you can attend church week after week, hear sermon after sermon, song after song, and it won't be any different than going to see Jeffrey Osborne, Beyonce, or whatever show you go see until you get the Jesus question straight. It won't make a noticeable difference in your life. When the Jesus question isn't straight, drill rappers. We were talking about this last week. Kim was bringing it up. The drill rappers. There's this, and there's just too many who are giving out verbal vomit. Is what it is. It is violent. It is hypersexualized. You know, and I don't want to pick one person out, but I'm going to name Megan Thee Stallion. You know, she had a song, WAP. Look it up. I mean, you know, when you don't get the Jesus question straight, right? These things influence our lives then more than our faith. Our children, grandchildren, and those of us who are blessed to have great grandchildren, I guarantee you, they will know who Cardi B is, but will not know who Zora Neale Hurston is. So in Acts the 8th chapter, this black man from Miro, which is in Ethiopia. He's an Ethiopian. He is on his way home from Jerusalem, where he was worshiping in the house of the Lord. Again, Dr. Wright points out, a black African in the midst of our faith. Black people are the ones who shape the faith. See, it wasn't given to us by slave owners. There's a whole boatload of black men and women who will say, that's your slave master's religion that you were given. You know, you can catch them in the Nation of Islam. They will point out that's your slave owner's religion, not realizing that Arab and Islam, Arabs enslaved Africans before Europeans did, and Arabs introduced enslaving Africans to Europeans, right? But, you know, take an Arabic name, okay? I mean, there's ignorance all around. This black man is from Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is not in the British Isles. It's not in France, it's not in Belgium or Scandinavia. It's in Central Africa. This is not an African chasing Tarzan, calling him Bwana. He's not a butler. He's not an employee. He's not driving Miss Daisy. He's riding in his chariot. He is in the administration of one of the queens called Candace. Now, in the introduction to the chapter, they named the particular queen that he is under, and that particular queen was a powerful military and powerful woman leader, and she stopped, you know, the Greek incursion into Central Africa, and he is an official. He is not riding in her chariot; he's riding in his chariot. He is in the administration. Queen Candace's, and again, there is enough dynamite here. The Queen Candace's ruled Ethiopia for 100 years. They had a succession of warrior queens. You find no equivalent to these black women, warrior queens. You don't find an equivalent to them in Europe, in China, in East Asia, nowhere on the planet except on the continent of Africa do you find warrior queens like this. Nowhere else. And so that's a whole, you know, I used to think, I wish they would do a movie about that. Then I said, no, I don't want Hollywood to mess with this, because they will mess it up. They will mess it up. First of all, they got to find an insertion of a white person. You know, Haile Gerima, black, the Ethiopian filmmaker, he has said, and among others, that Hollywood always, if you're gonna make a black movie, they always got to have a white hero in there. Remember Black Panther? They had to have the white guy to fly the plane to go destroy. They had to find a way so it will be okay for the studio to insert this white guy so that he could save the day. Always. Yep. 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 Yeah, Kim was just pointing out, and I do have the mic here, so we're gonna use this mic, y'all, so they can hear you. But yeah, Kim was just pointing out that it's always been that way. If you're gonna make a black movie, no, it's not going to get the marketing and the money if you don't have the entrance of a white hero in it, somebody that's a fond character. Well, that's why I say no, we don't. We need to do that independently, because the Warrior Queens are a story in themselves. He is serving this black man as the treasurer, which would be equivalent to the Secretary of the Treasury. And this is the other part about toxic masculinity and patriarchal mindset. He is serving in the administration of a black woman. Okay, which is a whole nother story. And he, along with a lot of other black men and women, okay, he is an African Jew whose responsibility it was to make it to Jerusalem for the great festivals of Pentecost, the Feast of Booths, and Passover. Okay, these black African Jews are prominent in the faith. How did he become in the Jewish faith? Well, been paying attention. I've been talking about it's an African faith in the first place. Then in the other part, I mentioned that he points his lineage back to when Solomon and Sheba met. And that's in the scriptures, right? Sheba travels to Jerusalem to meet Solomon. She has heard he's the wisest man on earth. She takes pounds and pounds of gold and all that type of stuff. They make this journey because she ain't no punk. She ain't going there to bow at his feet or nothing like that. She goes there to test him. She said, I heard you supposed to be so smart. And so, after they have their conversation, she said, you are pretty good. You are pretty good. Well, they fell in love and had a relationship. Here's another thing that messes the real, that I just like to poke fun at folk, so y'all don't mind. Solomon and Sheba didn't get married. They just had a baby. I'm not saying that, that's the objective of, fulfilling your desires. What I'm saying is we ought to stop beating up on single parents. That's what I'm saying. We ought to stop beating up on single parents. We ought to stop talking about children are bastards. There's no such thing. There is no such thing in God's sight. It's only human foolishness, and we ought to stop doing that. And so they fall in love. They have a child, Menelik. And Sheba, when she leaves, she takes the baby. When he becomes close to the age to be bar mitzvah, she says, I want you to know the other half of your ancestry, and that's your daddy's half. So she sends him to Jerusalem. And Solomon has the priests, teach him about, their practices of Yahweh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it comes time for Menelik to go back home. And Menelik, when he's going back home, Solomon doesn't want him to forget. Again, he's an older teenager, but he's still, a teenager. He may be, I don't know, he's about 17, 18, maybe 19. But guess what? Remember when you were 17, 18, 19, all the principles that our parents tried to teach us, and as soon as you got old enough and big and bad enough to do whatever you wanted to do, forgot all them principles, right? And so Solomon didn't want him to forget it. So Solomon ordered some priests to go with him. Now, the priest knew this was a one-way ticket. Solomon wants us to help, as this boy grows up, to be there so that we can, let him know about this side and whatnot. And they knew that I'm leaving everything. Now, they didn't want to leave. It's Jerusalem. They didn't want to leave. So they go into, the temple. They go into the Holy of Holies. You're only supposed to go in there once a year. But they went in there and said, if we're going to go, we're going to take God with us. And they go get the Ark of the Covenant. And they slip it out. And nobody was the wiser because it'd be a year later for somebody to go in there and find out, hey, where we put the Ark? And they were gone by then. Thus you have the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this brother, Ethiopian eunuch, traces his lineage back to Menelik, the son of Sheba and Solomon, because that was then the birthing of those folk, which today they're called Beta Israel or Falashas, right? So not only is this brother an official, black man in his own chariot, he's reading. Again, the narrative on our people, why Johnny can't read, those type of things. And good black teachers who are wedded to, developing our folk. You hear folks say, I have difficulty with math. There are math teachers who will say, do you want to learn math? But I have difficulties with math. Do you want to learn math? Yes. Then come on, I'll teach you. Because, the fear of not being able to do something doesn't erase the fact that if you got a master teacher, if you got somebody that is invested in you and not just, what you represent, but who you are. As the late Asa Hilliard used to say, we can teach anybody. Asa Hilliard would go to school systems and he'd say, give me the children that you have thrown away. Give me the children you call bad. Give me those that you say, you can't teach because they are disruptive and stuff. You give me those. And Asa would always bring them up and excel, because when you're invested in our children, you can get through to them, right? He's reading. Demolishes, the narrative that even some of us pick up, while you hear many of us say, I don't like to read. I don't like to read. Well, it's probably not that you don't like to read. It is how it is been presented and taught, right? Because it is a joy. Now, yeah, my parents, in the summertime growing up, as a adolescent, my parents were at work, had a babysitter, and my parents would say, have him come in every day, summertime, summer break. Have that boy come in the house from 1 to 3. He do nothing but read. So I had to come in and read. Other friends out playing. I remember one of my little friends, the babysitter said, Johnny, come on in here. You got to go read. And friend I was playing with, he said, you got to go read? I'll never forget the look on his face. It was like, ooh, dang. Yeah, I got to go read. And I would have to come in and read. And my parents said, they had the World Book Encyclopedia. Y'all remember that? The World Book Encyclopedias and all that. Yep. So, they had these stuff, so I had to read, But, we come from a reading people. And so here this brother is reading. And as an African, he could read in many languages. It's another thing about being in this nation. I remember being in Health Club one time, a friend of mine. We were in the steam room, right? This is when Bally's was open and they had a steam room. Now LA Fitness don't have a steam room. But we were in the steam room just chilling, and there were some Hispanic brothers in there. They were talking, in Spanish. And the guy was talking to the brother I knew. He said, I hate that. I said, what are you talking about? You hate what? I hate when they do that. What are you talking about? Man, I hate when they start talking in their language. Man, I wish they need to speak English. Now, this is a relatively conscious brother. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, dude, I don't got a problem with it. You know, and I know a lot of black people get uncomfortable, especially when Hispanic folk or anybody start speaking in their language. Don't bother me because I celebrate it. I mean, that's your language. It is the unfortunate and just the evil intentions of slave owners to take that away from us, right? Now, we developed other languages, which I'll talk about, you know, on another session, not this one. But so, you know, African people speak, you know, multiple languages. This is part of our, you know, it's part of our DNA that is, you know, being, you know, covered up. And so he was reading because he enjoyed reading, and he was reading in Greek. So if you have a study Bible and you look at this Acts, you'll see that it'll have notes at the bottom, and it'll have a capital LXX. And we know that represents the Septuagint. That 200 years before Jesus was born, 70 men got together, translated the Old Testament into Greek. So, because again, what I say last week, Greek was the lingua franca. It was the language of business. And so they translated the Old Testament in Greek. It's represented by that LXX. It's called the Septuagint. He is reading the Greek translation of the Old Testament. This is 15 centuries before chattel slavery. A black man is going to the house of the Lord to worship, and he comes from the house of the Lord reading. Okay? This ain't no white man's religion. This particular text gives us so much that blows up all of the narratives about our people, and it would lift up, again, for me, it is identity that is the key. Identity is not going to transform everyone, but it will transform a great many. To know who you are, why you are, and whose you are is the area of struggle. That's why I started out talking about what DeSantis is doing and other states in the nation that are banning African history, black history. They got bills all over the nation in states, and particularly run by Republican governors who are banning the study of black history. Why? Because truth will set you free. Okay? And so this is revolutionary for us. Now, again, and I put in my article that if they printed this week, I said, I know there are people that are reading this, black people, who will say, I'm sick of that black stuff. I don't want to hear no more black stuff, right? And again, that is a part of the conditioning from our Europe. So Dr. Wright closed out his sermon by pointing out what happens when a black man or a black person meets Jesus. He says they go to worship for relief, release, and a relationship. Relief, release, and a relationship. Worship, I put in an article, worship is essential. Coming to the house of the Lord has been the foundation that has helped us be fortified to this fight. The black churches all over the nation were the way stations on the Underground Railroad. Black churches were the places where our people would find somebody-ness. black churches were the places where many of our parents and grandparents first learned to read, because they would read the scriptures in Sunday school. And when they got to kindergarten or first grade, sometimes they would be elevated to the next grade because they had already got their ABCs and all those foundational things together in the church. Many of our schools started in a church. There was organizing and mobilizing going on in the black church. Now, I do need to say that there's a difference in the black church and a church with black people. It's a big difference. It's a big difference. And there were some people that, who are poo-pooing and upset with going to church and all that. Most of them have been to churches with black people and not the black church. So the churches with black people are trying to oftentimes either emulate white worship, or they are reducing worship to only feeling good, right? Just coming in and shouting and jumping and all that, and all that's important, but they don't want to teach truth, right? They don't want to communicate truth. They want to try to stay neutral, and so they will make black folk only emotional. Or they are churches where they are prosperity. They talking about, come on up here and throw $100 on the pulpit and you're going to get it back fourfold and all that type of stuff, right? Those are churches with black people. But black churches deal with the total person from that walks Monday through Saturday. Black churches address what black folk are going through. And black folk, as Dr. Wright points out, go through, he's talking about black men, but black people go through so much in a week. We get our heads, jumped on, that's why I made the quotes earlier from James Cone and the Association of Black Psychologists, that we go through so much pressure. You look at the news, in Memphis, a black man was murdered, and this was black cops. Okay, and the black cops just brutally murdered this brother, and they got fired, but they have not been indicted. And so black bodies are cheaper to black people, and so we got to deal with our own people. Dr. Wright points out him needing relief. And I remember him saying this, Mike Carson. I was in the sanctuary when he preached this, and he said in his sermon, he said, being a pastor, some folks think it's like being in a fishbowl. People are watching and all that type of stuff. People seeing what you do, all that, blah, blah, blah. He said, no. Being a pastor is like being in a piranha bowl. And when he said it, of course, I hadn't even set to call the ministry or anything like that. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a pastor now. I've been pastor for close to 19 years. He was spot on. Because somebody's always trying to take a piece of you. Take a bite of you, and so and he's talking about, he said, when I go to worship because I need relief, and for our people, worship provided through this gathering of the community relief. We come in with our heads beat in with and I mean, mental and emotional stress of having to get off the street when white folk are walking by, or working on jobs, and you see white folk getting elevated above you who have less education than you, but the job requires that you have this particular education, but you see the white folks moving up around you, or the microaggressions that'll happen on a job from white folk, how they pick at you, and then when you complain about it, what's wrong? You're not a team player, you don't know how to get along, and all that type of stuff. So now it's your problem again. And so going to worship, this is why that Jesus question is so important, because we got our young folk now. Daniel Black had said in the interview, he said, one of the worst things we stopped doing is taking our children to church. Because he said, I'm not talking about doctrine and some of the theologies in church. He said, I'm talking about being an African person. Being you. right? One of the worst things we did is stop taking our children to church. You know, because we said, well, my mom and daddy made me go to church. I'm not going to do that for my children and all that. And it robbed them of what it means to be African in community. Remember, I quoted last week, South African saying, a person is only a person because of other people. See? And so going to church provides, going to worship in the house of the Lord provides relief. That's why some of the songs, Dr. Wright quoted some of the songs that one of them said, I heard the voice of Jesus say, come unto me and rest, lay down thy weary one, lay down thy head upon my breast. I came to Jesus as I was, weary, worn, and sad. I found in him a resting place, and he has made me glad. Relief. He quoted Thomas Dorsey. The Lord will make a way somehow. When beneath the cross I bow, he will take away each sorrow. Let him have your burdens now. When the load bear down so heavy that the weight is shown upon my brow. You know, I was talking with Reverend Rodney Mumphrey one time, and Rodney said, you know, growing up, I couldn't understand why there were some older people, in particular some older women, who was always just mean. They were just mean, you know, mean looking and mean acting. And he said, now I'm grown. Now, I see, But yeah, there was always, but that's a part of the community. You got to deal with all kind of people. And so some folk have not gotten the relief because they didn't get the Jesus question right. He says, that song says, when the load bears down so heavy and the weight is shown upon my brow, there's a sweet relief in knowing the Lord will make a way somehow. This is relief to us. And then he says, what happens when a black person meets Jesus? They come to the house of the Lord for release. Because not only we get relief, but we got to release some stuff. We got to let some stuff go. He quoted the song, Come Ye Disconsolate. Here bring your wounded heart. Here tell your anguish. Earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal. Come ye disconsolate. If the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. At the cross where I first saw the light and the burdens of my heart rolled away, it was there by faith I received my sight, and now the release. I am happy all the day. There's a relief. He recounted the story about the woman who she and her husband had this child. The husband wasn't in church, and after a while, he didn't bother her about going to church, but finally he got in church. He had a relationship with Jesus Christ and all that, and then she gets pregnant with the second child. And he dies, suddenly of an illness that took him out. The woman was bitter. She was angry. But she got to raise this baby, right? This child that she had. The little girl's about 8 or 9 years old by now. And, the woman wasn't going to church. The child wanted to go to church. She didn't want to go to church because it reminded her that, the man she married, when he got saved, when he accepted the Lord, it was so sweet going to church with him. She didn't want to go to church no more. And she didn't want to hear no church music. She didn't want to hear no secular music because it reminded her of the sweet relationship they had. They used to listen to Luther Vandross and Dionne Warwick and all these songs, and it reminded her of the love. But the child wanted to listen to music. So she made an agreement with her daughter. She said, baby, while we in the car, whenever we in the car, you can listen to all the music you want. But when we get home, Mama can't take it. Mama working through some stuff. I can't take it. So she went to the grocery store this particular day, picked up the groceries. And as they're driving home, Dionne Warwick comes on. She did A House Is Not a Home, And, she told her, a chair is still a chair, even when there's no one sitting there. And, you know the song. And so she starts to tear up. She knows she's about to break loose with the tears. And so she's trying to keep her daughter from seeing her cry. So she speeds up a little bit to hurry up and get home, because once she gets home, they turn off that radio. And to get down the street, she's pulling in the driveway. And Dionne Warwick is at that point in the song as when I get to the door, you know, and she knows ain't nobody going to be there for her, and she don't want to hear that. So she parks the car. She jumps out of the car. She looks away because she don't want her daughter to see the tears coming, but she reaches back in without looking to grab the bag, the grocery bag, and she's pulling on it, but she can't pull it out because her daughter on the other end is pulling the bag, and her daughter said, "Mommy, I can carry it, but you won't let it go." And the woman said, "I heard the voice of Jesus right there saying to me, I can take it, but you won't let it go." So he counts that we come to worship because we need relief, we need release, and finally come to worship because of relationship. For many folk get all mixed up because they come for religion. This is about relationship. People, people can make you lose your religion. But if you got a relationship, they can't make you lose that relationship. Relationship with Jesus. It's not about precepts. It's about a person, Jesus, the African liberator. It's not about principle. It's about a person. How did Jesus live? What did Jesus say? How did Jesus interact with people? What is Jesus says to us? Get the relationship. That's why we come, because of a relationship. Because I got a relationship. You know, I'm gonna tell one more story and I'm done. Preaching, and there was a older lady in the back, and every Sunday, you know, she would greet him and say, "Oh, Pastor, you preach a powerful sermon. Preach a powerful sermon." And so one Sunday, he preached, and he knew that, you know, he had a lot of stuff going on that week, and he didn't get the sermon together till Saturday night. Lord have mercy, I've been there. And so when he got in the pulpit and preached, he knew that he didn't do all that he needed to do, and he didn't feel that sermon, you know, was prepared properly. And so he felt bad about it. And when he got to the back, the old lady kept saying, "Oh, Pastor, we had good worship today, and you preached, blah, 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 blah." And he said, So a couple of Sundays went by, and every Sunday she would come back, "Ooh, we had good worship today, Pastor." He pulled aside. He said, "Mother, every Sunday, you tell me we had good worship, and you just enjoyed the preaching." He said, "Now, Mother, I know there's some Sundays. I'm going to tell you, there's some Sundays I know I didn't get my lesson together. And I didn't feel good about it. But you good worship and all that type of stuff." He said, "Mother, come tell me now." She said, "Baby, understand something. When I come into worship, I can feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. I can literally see angels all around. And worship, you know, is just on point." She said, "But sometimes I know the choir got a little hell going on in there. I can tell. I know, I can see some of them up there, that, you know, how they looking at one another." And then "Baby, I'm going to be honest, I know sometimes you don't get your lesson." She said, "That's when I look around you all and I look at Jesus." And I'm going to have good worship every Sunday. And again, get the Jesus question right, and it will be the anchor to guide us through, right? So again, I want anybody in the, I have this other mic, so you all when y'all talking, just grab that mic, please, so that folk in the virtual space can hear. Any observations, any questions? Those of you in virtual, type your questions, please, or observations. Has it been all right? Did we make any sense tonight? Did I get my lesson? I mean, do we see how this thing about a relationship with the Jesus of the scripture, the Jesus of history, and not the Jesus that has been created by white hate and white supremacy, That Jesus, that what folk like to say, that white Jesus. No, I need black Jesus. You see that. You see how that makes a difference in how we are able to interact in this world when we are dealing with so many um, so many um, critical dysfunctions in the systems. Kim was talking about last week working with children and the children being over medicated, right? Because they're black children, and we all, we look at, the conditions of our school systems. Why do we have so many charter schools? It was a plan to make money and to confuse people by saying you got a choice. You want to have a choice, when in reality, most 99% of the charter schools are not doing any better than the public school. Go ahead, Kim. Let them hear your voice. Just pull it out. No, you can just pull it out. It snaps out. Yeah, yeah.
What's the difference between the charter schools and the regular public schools? Because I don't see a difference. I mean, you just separate them.
Yes, that's a good. Did you hear it? No, he's not working in public school now. There is the difference is there are several differences. One is the state pays money for our children to be in public school. So in Gary, it was something like $8,000 a child that would follow them. The charter schools bit off a big chunk of that, right? And when the charter schools don't want to deal with the child anymore, they toss them back to the public school. Right. The public school can't do that. They can't just throw children away. They're obligated to teach our children. So in that sense, there is no difference. And the objective, instead of robbing the public school of the needed resources, was to then, organize the public school. So first of all, you're paying teachers enough so you get the quality teachers. Okay. If you're not paying enough, then you don't get quality teachers. Now, what does that lead to? The next problem is, how are schools funded? They're funded by property taxes, right? So when you live in an area where they have adjudicated that your property taxes are lower, that means less money for you, right? And when you live in an area where the property taxes are higher, that means more money is going to that school, right? It's a trick. It's an arbitrary way of deciding who gets what funding based on what you have already done in a particular community of robbing it of its resources. Then you're going to punish it because you robbed it.
When I used to work for the schools, I thought the reason why charter schools was established was to reduce the cost of public education. In other words, when you have a tenured teacher, that person gets raises and so forth, year after year after year, the personnel cost goes up. So charter schools are primarily staffed by less scholarly folks. I mean, they're not tenured, so to speak. They're younger, therefore younger equals less pay. And so I thought that was what they were trying to do, was to reduce the cost of education.
So that's one of the things they said. Reverend Kim Green says they try to guide children to alternative option schools. So when you think about that, why is that something? Why would that be something that black children and black communities? Why is that a concern about reducing? That's some of the stuff they said. Why would they think of that in the black community and not the affluent community? That you want to reduce these costs And so, you got teachers tenured, blah, 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 right? Because they recognize the quality you have as an instructor, then the better the child is going to turn out, right? So instead of trying to act like this is a budgetary concern, it's not a budgetary concern. Because the other thing that we have to remember is there's more than enough money in this nation. This is what we're told, that there's a shortage. We gotta tighten the belt. Why? You ain't got to get up here. We'll bring it.
How do we get $16 billion for Ukraine to get beat up? Because you're losing a battle, you're not going to win. And no other country is stepping in to help Ukraine because they're scared. So if you can come up with $16 billion to fund a war that's not, we know you're not going to win. You're going to be defeated. Why are children suffering?
That's right.
And it's a problem. Okay, and I thought that public schools was government funded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not just through taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Why not start putting these schools and holding the leaders like superintendent and the board of education, the board,
Mm-hmm.
academic probation,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that these children's scores,
Mm-hmm.
they're not scoring like they should, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not holding them responsible?
Mm-hmm.
But they're not taking a pay cut. Their checks, they're still growing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they treat our kids in the black community is unacceptable, and we as a people should not be okay with that.
Yeah.
We are losing our children every day. Every day you turn on the news, there's another child dead. We lost a kid out here in Maryville. I'm going out to get some wings out in Homewood. Homewood is a pretty elite community. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago Heights. But, man, those schools are not struggling. Homewood Flossmoor, that school's not struggling. Even to Maryville High School, it's not a struggling high school. But when you get to Gary, when you get to East Chicago, why are our children the way you require them to dress? EC, you want them in uniforms. Okay. You want them in uniforms, but you serve them food that look like prison that you serve. You shouldn't give it to a dog. But when you go to these rich white schools, and I'm going to say Portage,
Mm-hmm.
those kids don't have to wear uniform and they get good lunches.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But why are we okay with that?
See, that's and I'm really glad the way you don't have to put it back in the thing, but I'm glad you closed it like that. Why are we okay with it? So the first line of defense comes from us, where we as a community demand some things, and we demand our elected officials to fight for some things. And one is, how we educate our children and having the funds to do it, and not accepting the fact that, well, the state doesn't have the money and this or that. No. You just pointed out the government overnight has voted on numerous occasions to send exorbitant amounts of money over to Ukraine, right? Overnight, no discussion. Who's going to pay for this? You didn't hear none of those questions, right? None of them. Because, again, these are white folk fighting white folk. And as I said, war is horrible. And whether Ukraine wins or loses, the fact of the matter is that the same energy, I don't care you sending 16 million there, but send, 20, 25, 40, 50 million here or more. Billion here. That's right. Because you proving that you got the money, you've been lying because you said we don't have the money to do this. How are we going to pay for this? And how you get that stuff. No, what we're looking at is, it's not benign neglect, it's malicious intent. And so, you raised a good point. And then, the way we are educating our children. So again, we still have the struggle with curriculum. So, I remember the spelling book I had. I remember the spelling book, I first opened it up. It had a black child, and it had a book, and the black child was running, and it had learn, burn. In other words, the black child was burning up the opportunity to read. I remember that there was a big outcry, and they changed that so that picture wasn't there anymore because, again, it was sending a message. Now, how did it get there in the first place? See, it had to pass through, some folk who said, yeah, that's about the size of it. So a lot of what we get as text and curriculum comes out of Texas. Okay? And I think Florida is another one. So the curriculum itself. So one of the things we miss is that during segregation, when we could only go to our schools, master teachers. Now, here's where the critical race discussion happens among attorneys, is that was the Brown versus Board of Education the best thing for us? Because what happened then was they start busing black children to white schools. What happens to those master teachers? They no longer can work. Maybe one or two gets absorbed, and then they face hell in the white institutions because the others don't want them there, right? So you literally choked off through our fighting, which should have really been for the resources that you give to the white schools to give to our schools. We don't want to be sitting next to you. That's not what our objective was, to be in your school. And so that's where Derek Bell and some of the others, question, was this the right thing? Zora Neale Hurston, she did a whole thing. It got some people upset because she said, no. We've been educating our children for a long time. We don't need to go sit in a white school where they're not wanted. See? But, again, it's the same way with businesses and, making sure they're set aside for what? Minorities. The language is you have to be careful of the language, because minority includes a white woman whose husband owns the business and he puts it in her name. She's a minority. Go ahead.
Back to the question in Gary, in my opinion. We've got more charter schools in Gary than anywhere else in the state. It's about money. It's about money because the majority of the charter schools are owned by a group, usually white, and they making money off of education. Money that should be going to public schools, they decide they're going to take part of that public school money and shift it to a charter school. And the charter school is about profit and with no accountability.
There you go. No, that's the accurate opinion. Again, we found a way to make money off poor black people.
Been doing it since day one.
Mm-hmm. No, don't stop. Keep going.
So the HBCUs, let's go there.
Come on.
My son went to an HBCU,
Which one?
Kentucky State.
Okay.
They don't answer the phone. They mismanage. They don't. They do not. They mismanage finances. They're unorganized. It's not cheap to attend an HBCU. But why are they struggling financially? You put a kid out if you can't make a tuition, if they don't make their tuition payment. Kentucky State put some kids out back in, I think it was 2013. There was a bunch of kids in January that if their tuition was outstanding, they put them out. And so clearly you're not letting them go with the outstanding balance, or you have, and now you're in a deficit. But what's the excuses? Like, again, administration is not losing any money. You haven't fired anybody from the top. And what are you doing with the money? And why is it always black students to suffer? And if America can come up with $16 billion for Ukraine, you can wipe out those student loans that you keep saying in them little piece of paper, like fill it out, you know, to get your loan waived. But now they're not sure if they want to waive those student loans. We shouldn't have to beg for an education. It should be free.
Well said. HBCUs, two of my children went to HBCUs. And so when you look at, you're absolutely right. When you look at the funding that the PWIs, we call them, in any state, they are outfunded. They are more funded, maybe 3-to-1 to the HBCUs, right? So they are dealing with a lack of funding, but they're also dealing with just some plain old, what you just said, mismanagement and hierarchical foolishness and people that just want to stay in position. A lot of people want to stay in position and, and keep their little, their little nest egg or whatever. So you're dealing with that. Unfortunately, black folk do some messy stuff too. And so the other part to that is that the community nature of HBCUs is one of the strongest points because there's something about being around your own people, Now, if we could get that together, and it's not all HBCUs, there's some of them doing a great job, but if we could get, our folk to, again, it's just like the black cops in Memphis. I heard Reverend Al Sharpton saying, these black cops ought to be, we ought to have as much outrage with them as we would a white cop that would murder somebody. Well, the same thing as we see, money that white folk are mismanaging that black folks should have. We ought to be upset with black folk mismanaging the money, mismanaging the education of our children. We ought to be upset. And, that's where people that are called alumni are important, I don't understand why, Roosevelt had to close. Did they have alumni? Okay, I know I'm stepping on, I'm gonna leave it at that.
I'm an alumni.
I understand. But you ain't the only one.
But that situation, reason it closed because the state put in a manager for all the schools. Roosevelt needed a lot of maintenance. It closed. Wasn't done by the community. It was done by the state person that took over the Gary Public Schools. It's making millions of dollars a year because it's a private, Florida-based system. That's what happened at Roosevelt.
And to go a little further, why did they take over?
Because there's a couple of reasons. All this is my opinion.
It's okay.
I think I'm not in favor of an elected school board.
Okay.
That's me.
Mm-hmm.
The person that brought that up statewide and got it passed, I told him he was wrong. But as black people, we ought to have the very best on our school board. Elected ain't nothing but a popularity contest.
Yeah.
We had some of the worst when we got that elected school board. This is all my opinion. Some of the worst. Gave them credit cards and they went all over the world.
And go ahead.
They never got the money back, I don't believe.
And when a superintendent was fired, they still had to pay them 2 or 3 years after that while they paying the new person because of the contract. So
it's a whole, but I think a school board for a community school ought to be the very best in the community.
Absolutely.
Not a popularity contest.
Absolutely. So,
Somebody that knows something about education, somebody knows something about accounting, a spiritual leader. Reverend Penn was the first black school board member way back. And you need, and they made him the treasurer because they could trust him. We got a lot of problems in our.
well, I mean, and see, this opens up why this is important. Because, remember I said, there is no we. We think there's a we. We say because we're black, we. Well, I made the point about there's the black church and there are churches with black people. And that just means that some of us have colonized thinking.
Brainwash.
And yeah, and some of us are are loving it. We really want it, and some don't realize it. They think that they're being businesslike, or they're just whatever, the American way of seeing things. And so we've got that mixture, and this is why this is important for us to prepare ourselves to deal with our own people and deal with those who are the outside hand. Because again, we see ourselves as fighting over a piece of the pie, when in reality the whole pie is up for us. You get what I'm saying? And when we are fighting over a piece of pie, we got selfish people, greedy people, and people who are living out of the what do you call that? The thirst and the necessity, not recognizing that there is enough for everybody and demanding that. So that and what you're saying about elections, unfortunately, this has become a system where popularity contests. So, I've been saying for a long time, I'd love to have a political forum, a debate between candidates for an office where you give out during that discussion with the people there, you give out the job description of a governor, of a mayor, of a president, of a council person. What is it this person being elected in that office has the authority to do? Because what happens is we get campaign speeches about, we're gonna solve world hunger. You can't do that. Not in that position. But, there are people that are, well, go ahead, Howard.
And the system's set up where you keep fighting amongst each other, and all you have left is the crumbs. That's all we end up with because we fighting each other. That's another problem.
It's scripted to do it for that, right?
It's set up that way.
Go ahead, Sean.
Speaking of your point, the state law, I worked at the schools. I was third in charge of schools one time. The state law dictates the authority of a mayor. It's written in state law. So the mayor, you can see what the mayor's responsibilities are. You can see what the superintendents of schools are. You can see all of them. It's all state law.
Yep.
So you really wouldn't have to even, you could probably just get somebody to research and pull out out of the statutes. And
Absolutely.
say, here's, so you would have that stuff just by law.
Absolutely. So, we're looking at, let's take Gary. I mean, well, let me give you an example. So in Chicago, there's a school, Kipling School, and I remember Dr. Wright talking about this. And I was a volunteer at the Kipling School, and I was actually a substitute teacher at the Kipling School. But Dr. Wright talked about there was a time where they needed a principal. So the local school council, they created these local school councils, right? It's a mess. It's a mess. And they're deciding on the new principal. They start interviewing folk from Skokie, Illinois. Now, Skokie, Illinois is a white area, Jewish white, right? And Dr. Wright was on the committee because the church is in the area. And he hit the roof. He had to say, wait a minute. Do you think that any school in Skokie is trying to interview any black person from the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago, or anywhere in Chicago, why are we, all black folk up in here, black school, black neighborhood, black children, interviewing somebody from Skokie? We got enough black people that could do this. You see? So, you know, it is. And so instead of, now, talking about the issue is important. And the other part then is, what do we do? And that's why I go back to the black church. The black church is the freest institution we have, the black church, not just a church with black people in it. And we always can have an impact when we get the Jesus question right. And again, we begin to create that which is we need. Okay? And for too many of our people see it just as coming to church, having a good moment, and then going back home, not recognizing that, you know, your tithe and your participation. So there are different ways we can always create a ministry outreach that will advocate, that will even build, you know, since charter schools, they're not going to go away, we can build a charter school that has Afrocentric values. You get what I'm saying? And we can be in control of it to decide who's running it. And if they ain't running it, we can then get the person who's going to run it. You hear what I'm saying? We can write grants to fund it, right? To fund it in it. So we can do these things. Mike, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that part of the reason that they instituted a lot of charter schools in Gary, a couple, is union busting, first of all, because it weakened the union. They did that. And then when you had people that were downstate, I think they had a superintendent whose wife was employed by a company that did curriculum, like textbooks. So what you had to standardize testing, and so what they started doing, they started chipping away at the power of the teachers, because they were trying to get the teachers to to teach towards the tests that these guys had hooked up. What's the I-STEP test? And then you had people that were on the inside with the people that were administering the test and creating the test. That they had what am I trying to say? You had people that were it was collusion, so to speak. And then part of that collusion was to get once the kids did not achieve certain levels in terms of that testing, then there was pressure on the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then charter schools came in with the idea, well, we're going to help get these students over, you know, to be able to pass these standardized tests that they made.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that was just smoke and mirrors.
Well, yeah.
So
And we had leaders who led the way in bringing charter. Gary was the test center. There were more charter schools per capita in Gary than any place else in the nation.
Right.
Right? Because it was a test area. And so we had our own people who would, just like in Chicago. Yeah.
And then I know another good point you make is that the school boards are weak school boards. You had people that in no way should have been on school boards. And then a bad one thing about Gary is that there's a lot of cronyism, in the sense that, hey, we went to school together, so I see that you since you have this position, I'm not going to say too much about what you're doing that ain't right, because you and me are tight. You know, we run in the same social circle. So you have people that should have said things about people that should not have been on school boards, you know, had no interest. And then what they did when they were elected, they got their people in, and they took money, serious money, away. and transfer that money to, to their people.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can try to put it. As far as, and this is Mike Carson's perception of it.
Well,
And-
I mean,
And the state came down, when the state said that, when the state saw all that, and that foolishness, plus the fact that students weren't meeting the standard on those tests that the state created, because for one thing, they made the situation with the tax base so that the schools wouldn't lose out because they lost a lot of tax money. First of all, the schools lost a lot of tax money in Gary. Lost a lot when they did that reassessment with U.S. Steel, they lost a lot of tax money, and they shifted the burden of the taxes onto the homeowners. And then they were trying to get those referendums to pass, and they wouldn't pass. And they finally did pass. Well, after somebody went downstate, and they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to let the state take over. And they took all the powers away from the school board. We'll let the state take over. The state took over, and then the state took over. But when
So-
somebody came down there and said, we need your help. I don't know.
So, as much as we can detail what happened, now the responsibility is detail how we will organize to change it. Because we are proficient at identifying what happened. What we have become deficient is organizing to change. So I'm gonna say this and we're gonna wrap up. The great Willie Dixon, historian out of DuSable Museum, in the 80s, I heard him say, there is ex facto and there is ipso. He said ex facto means after the fact, means that people record what happened in detail after the fact. Ipso facto is right in the moment. It is people that are dealing with the issue right then. We are people now that we have to plug in to where we can be of help to change. So as much as we know in here, the responsibility now with all that you all have said is now where can I plug in? And I'm saying right here at Trinity UCC Gary, we got some opportunities to plug in. We just need you to step up because I don't want to look up and all we doing is talking about what happened. This what happened. And because my grandchildren will not honor me in that. They will not honor me, granddaddy. You can tell good what happened. Well, what did you do? And your grandchildren won't either. Okay? All right, y'all. We're going to have a word of closing prayer. And this has been good, but we got to go. So, dear God, thank you for this time that you have blessed us. Thank you for the sharing that we have done. It's been rich. It has been about a painful reality, but it's rich because our voices synthesized together on one accord. And so we thank you for that. Now, bless us as we leave from this place, but never your presence. This gathering, but not your grace. This sanctuary, but never your spirit. And we'll be careful to give you the praise, honor, and glory in Jesus' name. Amen.